All right. Hi, everyone. I am Dave Carroll, Head of Marketing at Zenput. It's great to have you with us. On behalf of everyone at Zenput, I want to welcome you to the Convenience Agility Summit and today's keynote session. Really excited to bring together here at our inaugural summit some of the best operations minds from the C-Store community and industry experts, including today's two keynote speakers. And we have with us today, very excited to have Melissa Wilson, who is a principal with Technomic's advisory practice, and also our very own Tom Hart, who is convenience industry lead at Zenput. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little more fully in a moment. So in today's keynote, what Melissa is going to do, she's going to present findings from a brand new joint research study. Very excited to be able to kind of unveil this today. The study was a collaboration between Zenput and Technomic, and it's brand new, hot off the presses. We just ran this early in Q1. Responses came in February, so it's really, I think, helps us put a pulse on kind of what a lot of folks in the community are thinking. What the research aimed to do, we looked to get a fresh pulse on what are the top operations challenges facing the industry, and with a real focus on what's getting in the way of team execution, whether that's at the headquarter level, in the field, or even at the store level. And then we also look to uncover not just the challenges, but where are operators prioritizing and investing to serve customers in new ways to drive growth as we all look to move beyond the pandemic. So Tom and Melissa are going to help us unpack some of these themes that emerged from the study. So with that, Tom, Melissa, let me pass the mic to you to introduce yourselves a little bit and start. Melissa, why don't we start with you?
That sounds great, and thanks so much for inviting me here, and it was great to collaborate with you on this research, David, and bringing it to the community. As David mentioned, I'm a principal with Technomic. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are a research and consulting firm, have been in business bringing research and insights to the food service industry since 1966. So we've been through a lot of cycles through the various channels of the food service industry. I've been with the firm for 17 years, and I lead the firm's operator advisory practice, working across channels within the industry. And in terms of the C-Store channel, I not only work with restaurant operators, but also in the C-Store channel in previous history, have worked with leadership teams on a lot of initiatives from strategic planning to bringing new trends to the industry, concept testing, and rollout of both domestic and global C-Store brands in the past. Delighted to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us, Melissa. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, so I've been in the convenience industry since I was 18 years old, since 1978, to be exact, so a long time. Started out as a stock clerk, moved on as a store manager, which is a job I absolutely loved. Working my way through operations, first as a DM, then as a regional director of operations, and eventually fortunate enough to become chief operating officer. In 2007, we started Dashboard Advantage, where I got to continue to help convenience store operators focus on operational execution, which, quite honestly, has always been a passion of mine. I absolutely love it. And luckily now, with Zenput acquiring Dashboard Advantage last year, I'm lucky enough to continue to help store operators with operational excellence. Worked out well.
Well, we're very lucky to have you, Tom, and I learn something new from you every day. So to have that kind of domain expertise in the company is amazing. So let's dive in. So Melissa, I shall pass the baton to you, and you can kind of walk us through this study.
Absolutely. And David, you set up for our audience that's listening a bit about what the overall objectives were for the study and what the goals that we were looking to learn. You know, it's really kind of a state of operations execution for the C-Store industry. And I also want to point out that we were fortunate enough to collaborate with you on a similar study last year. So we'll be able to, during the course of today, we'll talk about some of the differences we've seen as well. In terms of the methodology, so that those that are listening understand whom we surveyed and what the responsibilities, et cetera, were. As you mentioned, this is hot off the press. It was fielded in February of this year, and we just wrapped up the report just last month and are working to bring these insights to all those listening. The respondents that we surveyed all have operational decision-making responsibilities, and they include a wide variety of responsibilities and roles and titles, including VPs and Director of Operations, C-level execs, district regional managers, and operations managers. And the response base includes, as you can see, a pretty equal split between franchised operations and corporate owned. The majority of respondents were operating locations between 10 and 100 locations. And as in addition, I think an important note about the respondent base is the overwhelming majority of the operators offer food service, such as hot or cold fresh products at their stores. So let's dig into what we found. All right, the first thing that we wanted to share with you is, as I mentioned, we'd done a similar study with Zenput last year, but obviously with the pandemic, there were a lot of changes related to operations within the industry, right? So we thought it really important to understand what those changes were and how they might impact operations, not only today, but in the future for the C-store industry. So naturally, as you can see, C-store operators had to quickly use that word pivot that we are all using within the industry, pivot quickly to make a lot of new business decisions and process changes in response to the pandemic, focusing on safety, social distancing, and keeping the operation running safely. So some of the areas that we saw the most change within the operations were, of course, integrating those enhanced sanitation procedures to keep both employees and customers safe, things such as employee temperature checks. Radical change for our industry for sure is fewer or no in-person meetings, and district and regional operations either working remotely or visiting stores less often, which of course makes it a bit of a challenge to keep up on ensuring that all of these new procedures are implemented and are being adhered to properly, because there's a lot to train in there. And then we also a lot fewer meetings, more off-premise production, and then one of the other huge, larger changes that we saw was this shift to newer increased usage of third-party delivery service or integration of third-party ghost kitchens that are shared with other brands. So an awful lot going on during the pandemic. And if we take a look at the next slide, as you look at moving forward, we also asked respondents, well, of these changes that you've made, how likely are they to stay around? Which do you expect to be permanent or to keep in place after the pandemic? And you can see the overall majority, overwhelming, really do expect all of these sanitation procedures and safety procedures to be remaining in place. But we're also seeing that 2/3 expect that they're going to continue to offer third-party delivery, curbside pickup, which has been a totally new phenomenon for the C-store industry. 2/3 are expecting to either keep the new offering or increase that moving forward. So again, most of these changes that we saw during the pandemic, in most cases, the majority are expecting to keep those in place. Even things such as training being shifted to online and district and regional operations management continuing remote work.
Yeah, super interesting. There's so much here. I agree. We're seeing this in the conversations we have every day that it does look like there's a little bit of a new normal in terms of expectations that customers have, so that things are likely to stick in a lot of these areas. Melissa, I am curious. What most surprised you in terms of the response? Like, did you expect certain changes to have more staying power than they actually, the data is proving out?
Great question, David. Some of them not a surprise about enhanced safety procedures, but first and foremost, the pandemic really accelerated changes in the industry in certain areas where the C-store channel was behind. Food service and retail channels, such as greater integration of technology in areas like checklists and online training, as well as the addition or expansion of third-party delivery. That has been really accelerating in the restaurant channel over the past 5 years and had started to be ingrained in the C-store industry in some operations, but wasn't really widely used yet. So I'd say the biggest surprise is how quickly this industry has been able to make some of these changes. So kudos to all that have been able to do so. In terms of staying power, there's no question that the enhanced sanitation procedures and monitoring are here to stay. Our overall syndicated research with consumers, they tell us that resoundingly they need to see those visible sanitation activities to feel comfortable and safe in an indoor environment moving forward as we move out of this pandemic. But the increased usage of off-premise formats like third-party delivery and curbside pickup, those are major shifts for the C-store operations, and especially operations with food service, and present a tremendous opportunity to grow that business. So I think it's exciting to see that there's such a high level of expectation to keep those in place following the pandemic. And then lastly, you know, as so many companies across so many industries have come to realize, I think this is a societal shift, not just a C-store channel shift. Not everything needs to be done in person, just as we have this summit here today that we're doing remotely, and everybody's able to join and participate. So the broader shift to more remote oversight, is mentally challenging as it is for some, especially district level and senior level executives, has been working, and definitely anticipating to see that moving forward. So again, surprised, but also pleased to see the high percentage that are expecting to move more training online, have fewer in-person meetings, district regional ops managers traveling less, for example. So regardless of what industry you're in, this shift to broader remote work and more digital adoption seems to be here to stay regardless of the industry.
Hey, Tom, how about you? I mean, you're in conversations every day with C-store operators. Any other thoughts based on those conversations, what you're seeing and hearing? Which of these do you think will really outlast the pandemic?
Certainly, yes. But first, I wanted to say how proud I am of just all the frontline employees in the convenience industry. You know, when you think about it, as the rest of us took a step back, they really had to step up and stay open. They didn't pause at all, like many in the nation. So we could still get gas, we could still grab a cup of coffee, a quick meal. Even the essential goods like paper goods and pantry, convenience stores were used as a backup to grocery, and they didn't stop for a day. I remember early on in the pandemic when I was in a parking lot filling up with gas, and the employee came up the front of the door and started sweeping the lot, and it just gave me a reassuring feeling that, hey, there's some sense of familiarity here, like things will get better, and they haven't missed a beat. So hats off to them, just so proud. I'm not surprised because it's a tough group of people that do a lot of hard work every day, but very impressed with the people there. As far as the changes that are occurring that'll continue, I agree. The enhanced cleaning procedures are here to stay. One differentiator there is, I think it's just not clean. It needs to be safe. So it needs to be sanitized. It's no longer an expectation of just, hey, the store's clean. They want to see people sanitize in the store. So that is not going to go away. Another thing I agree with is the use of third-party delivery and curbside pickup. I think the industry was headed in that direction, and the pandemic really just condensed the time to get there. So we were looking at it, and then it came and everyone said, let's get into this pretty quickly. And they did. I think it really has to, because now instead of an added service, it's an expectation of customers. And I think it helped drive food sales and customer visits as a big plus. I think the last thing is need to document critical safety procedures. These are often local regulations, and it showed the need for operators to be more agile. They need to execute, record, and demonstrate compliance. I think that's only going to continue to grow stronger. And who could have predicted we would be required to ask employees if they have any past illnesses or if they have a fever before the shift? We would have never thought that. Now that's a regular occurrence before people start. So a lot's going to stay. I think we learned a lot of lessons as well.
All right, great. Thanks, Tom, for sharing. All right, let's jump to our next stop on the tour of the research.
Yeah, next finding, technology becoming critical to operational success, but paper lives on. So, Here I'd mentioned before that we could show some comparative data. No question the pandemic has accelerated adoption of technology across the C-store industry. In fact, has more than doubled integration of technology to automate tasks. Think about that in just over a year, more than double from 27% to 57% using technology to automate tasks to a great extent. Massive, massive shift for any organization and any industry. But let's go ahead and take a look at as well. We also asked for the variety of operational tasks that occur every day. We wanted to understand how those are tracked and managed, because there's a lot of different companies out there, a lot of different concepts, a lot of different roles. And what we found is that, even though technology has accelerated a lot in terms of integration, there's paper still very much in use. So even though the majority using tech, paper checklists still heavily used for things like temperature checks, make line usage, et cetera. So there's still a lot of usage of paper checklists, even though we have higher adoption of technology versus last year. In fact, the main area that technology has been integrated the most has been inventory. A lot of room for additional integration of technology based on the findings from the study.
And it's super interesting. I mean, I think we, in some sense, at Zempa, because we're a technology company, we're interfacing mostly with those that are ready to embrace technology and continue to automate. But the reality is, it's a big industry with a lot of folks that are at different parts of their technology adoption journey. Melissa, were you surprised that so many respondents reported still being so reliant on paper, like, paper checklists as an example?
Well, it's interesting. Yes and no. So as I mentioned before, and we all know, the C-store industry has lagged other food service and retail channels in adopting technology. And we've seen the same lag in this restaurant industry. And hard to say, but it's true that the C-store channel has often been several steps behind the restaurant industry in some key areas. So what we were surprised about is, again, if you contrast to the restaurant channel and you think about a full service restaurant or even a limited service restaurant, they made the complete morph to total integration of technology for menus. Massive rapid shift, because there is that concern when you're concerned about paper, when you're concerned about safety, paper is actually considered a safety risk. So one actually might have expected even more wholesale integration of technology to reduce that contact and touching. But the other thing really important is, as Tom mentioned a minute ago, so much new tracking that needs to be done for all these safety procedures. And also there's so many concerns and policies about tracking things related to food preparation, food safety, and so forth. So the high levels of paper checklist use in areas that one could consider mission critical that can impact operational readiness and cost was surprising.
All right, that makes sense. Tom, what's your reaction? It's kind of like a mixed view. The previous slide talked about, wow, the massive adoption, like in 1 year, there's this acceleration. But you see a little bit of the contradiction but paper checklists live on, right, and continue to be used. Do you maybe the words empathize, do you empathize with not quite wanting to give up paper-based tracking? Is this just inertia, or is there a reason more of the industry hasn't already embraced digitation of whether it's checklists or core operating procedures?
I think it's a mixture. I think the easiest transition from paper to digital are the typical district manager, store leader walkthroughs. It's simple. It's got an immediate benefit from documenting that, being able to send notifications, using photos to be more precise in their feedback. So it's really easy to implement. I think when you get into a food operation such as make lines or production sheets, it's a much bigger adjustment. So it's going to take some more time. I think it's natural to focus on the easiest to implement. That's why you might see a mix of the two. But I think digitizing food operations is ultimately going to give operators the biggest return. I really believe that. Once people see the benefit of how the data can help them better manage their operation, we really need to increase productivity and efficiencies, because we're short on help, and we need to do that. So we're going to see an uptick in movement in these other areas. I think one area we're getting there quickly is digitizing documentation and temperature checks. I believe the biggest reason is for this rapid adoption is it gives management visibility remotely across all their locations. So they can see that this critical function is being done. And also, many state and local agencies, they're looking for documentation. And I agree, Melissa, like paper can get lost. You may have been doing a good job for the past 3 months of temperature checks. And if that goes away, you cannot prove that those past 3 months of work. So digitizing that really removes that liability, especially if supervisor visits become less frequent, like they did last year in many cases. It allows them to still have line of sight over the stores. In some cases, paper still works, right? I have paper on my desk here, like a vendor visit login or bulletin board or some of these employee journals. So there will be some of that, but digitizing the critical areas, those needs are going to continue to grow. In many areas, it's probably going to be required.
Yeah, I think you hit on, I think just that the term remote visibility, inherently paper's not very good at allowing that, right? You're inherently constrained when you write it down on a piece of paper. When you capture it digitally, centrally stored, anyone can view, like you open all kinds of efficiencies, right?
Yeah.
So it's the adoption naturally will kind of flow from there. Great. All right. Well, let's see next stop.
All right. You know, our next overarching finding was that headquarters store communication is frequent, but it's not necessarily effective. So let's take a look at what our respondents told us in this survey. So C-store operators send an average of 30 communications to their stores each month on a variety of different topics. So you can look at the breakdown, you know, not a surprise during the pandemic that the most frequent topic was safety and hygiene. Good news that food safety was next, and then general news and reminders, limited time offers, policies and procedures. So no question, an awful lot of communication going on. But one of the things that really stood out from the survey is that only less than half are extremely confident that that communication has been effective. Yeah, and if we look at, again, the methods that are being used for each of these types of communication. So although the majority are email, you've got a quarter that are communicating some key issues, especially safety, hygiene, food safety, et cetera, policies and procedures in person, face-to-face, or by phone. As well as other methods as well. So not only is there a lot of communication, but there's communication really kind of coming in from all sides, not unlike when you're sitting at your desk and you're getting, you're watching a webinar like this, but you're also getting emails and somebody's texting you on the side. So it's hard to keep track with all of that communication coming in from a lot of conduits.
Yeah, it makes sense. So it is interesting. Is there a point where too much communication is maybe not such a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's
or,
like,
or, or maybe I'll say another way, isn't it a good thing? I guess there's a lot of communication happening. Is that inherently good, or is there kind of a trap in all this?
It's a good question. You know, you have to question, is more better, you know, especially when you look at some of these conduits. So email, yeah, that's trackable. Communications that are happening in person or on the phone aren't. To Tom's point earlier, you know, if you're needing to track and follow up on things, it's far harder to do that if a lot of communications are happening in person or on the phone. No, more isn't necessarily better. And again, as I mentioned a second ago, we think one of the key findings here is that really stood out to us is that less than half of operators are highly confident that these communications are effective. So that can result from sending too many communications too frequently. But again, the different formats. So email is the most prevalent, but we also have that high usage of in-person and telephone, which can make it challenging to confirm that those messages has been shared with the team or flagged for follow-up. So again, another area, a lot of room for improvement here.
Sounds good. I guess on the improvement topic, Tom, I guess rising up, you know, from some of the data here, what are your thoughts on how communication is happening? I guess based, again, I know you're conversations, experiences working with operators, where do you see the most upside for improvement in communication?
Certainly. So, email communication is easy for the sender. They send it and they can send it out to, 200 stores quickly and it's done. But it really leaves the store manager as a single point of responsibility to then go share that message with everyone else. And it's coming from multiple departments and the supervisors. So it's coming from all, think of those 30 emails, directives coming in. It's not from one person, it's from a bunch of different initiatives. And then they need to communicate what might be happening on 3 or 4 different ships. So there's a lot of dependency on, these conversations happening. That marketing team's message may seem like it's a simple directive, how did the ball get dropped here? But it's one of many. So when you have that many, communications coming through and you don't have a good system, breakdowns are going to occur. It's just going to happen. I think in person is better, but again, the supervisor is still dependent on the manager to share those details with members of the team. And it's really that they're the ones who are going to execute the plan. Probably it's the manager, but it's the multiple people working in the store. My experience has been that organizations who coordinate and try to funnel the information to a central location where everyone can access, they have the best chance of success. Or some organizations are actually now hiring an operations specialist and everything goes through them. They improve the programs, they're looking at the communication, and they coordinate this communication so everyone doesn't send out all their emails or all their communications directives on the first of the month. So the manager's overwhelmed. They will help them plan out those initiatives. Most often you're going to find that the employees are just as frustrated as the folks in the sports center when there's gaps in communication. People want to know what's going on. They want information to do a better job, especially when you think about it in a pandemic. You need to get information quickly. You need to have a good system. With 55% of the operators not having high confidence in their effectiveness, I think it's a great opportunity for the industry to really review how these communications are going out, how they're letting people know about new procedures, and really reevaluate how those are being done today.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And if you look, the thing that jumps out to me is take food safety as I'm looking at it. Like that is like one of the more critical, things you got to get right. And just that communication's happening in so many ways. It's kind of like, what's the source of truth, right? In terms of what I need to do or like what status of a problem, right? So inherently you could there's almost like a visceral, like something must be going wrong here. All right, but on the topic of food safety, I think that's maybe where we're going next.
Yeah,
indeed.
It's actually a pretty good segue.
Yeah.
Huge finding here, we thought. I mean, really, really important area that everybody listening on the call really needs to think about pretty seriously here. No question, any channel that is offering food, regardless of whether it's prepackaged or fresh prepared or made to order, food safety needs to be a primary consideration and needs to be top of mind. And we found out that, there's some real concerns here that the industry needs to consider. So the majority of operators, 62%, almost 2/3, agreed that a food safety issue would put their business at risk. Now, I'll have a bit more to say on that, maybe. Only 34% of operators are able to address a food safety issue within a day. And only half felt very confident in their ability to identify potential food safety concerns before they become an issue. This is a major issue. I welcome hearing what Tom has to say on this as well. I mean, we have to tell you that our reaction when we saw the data around food safety was that the results were abysmal. One could say, wow, the majority agree that food safety issues could put their business at risk, but that should be 100%. That should be 100%. So
yeah, it's interesting.
Let's talk about that.
Because well, especially because your purview is deep into convenience, but you're also very close to what's happening in the restaurant world.
Right.
how does this compare? Like in restaurants, it's kind of probably more their lifeblood, like they live and breathe by prepared foods, and fresh, food and ingredients,
Yeah, and
from supply chain to our plate, to our tables.
yeah, and it's so top of mind for everybody in the restaurant industry. So I think that's a good benchmark to compare to. It can shut down your business. It can make your employees ill. It can make your customers ill. It can destroy your brand reputation short term and potentially longer term if you aren't able to resolve the issues over time, or if it crops up in multiple locations. So, I'll go back to what I said just a minute ago. I mean, anybody that's offering food service needs to have this top of mind. And they need to believe that it would put their business at risk, because it will. So we were perturbed, but particularly given when you think about the C-store industry has been going so much more into offering fresh prepared foods. And from the survey responses, I also want to point out, remember, I'd mentioned at the outset that 90% of the respondents in the survey offer food service, fresh, hot or cold prepared food. So this is not operators that are, the data isn't skewed by operators that are only offering packaged goods. These are food service offering convenience store operators. So at first glance, like I said, it might be good news, but that's something that 62% is that 100% of operators offering food service should be agreeing that it would put their business at risk. And that piece about only half were highly confident that they could identify food safety concerns, here again, I mean, really should be at 90, I'd say 100%, but really should be at least at 90% or better. And that's what we would see in a restaurant channel, or expect to see in a restaurant channel survey. So this is telling us that half don't have the systems in place or the confidence in their current operating procedures to identify these areas of concern quickly.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, like maybe, I mean, you as a former operator, right? Like with all the things that need to get done, there's this practical matter of like, you're trying to get a lot done in a day. With all the things that need to get done in a store every day, what is the answer to staying on top of like maybe the most important tasks, especially corrective actions that need to happen to address issues that come up,
That's interesting.
Around food safety or otherwise,
Sure. Yeah, it's funny, in the past year, speaking to operators, I mean, fresh food sales have risen dramatically for folks that were ready for it. And when gas sales were plummeting, I mean, food sales really carried the day for a lot of these folks. They might not have survived without it. When restaurants were forced to close, we were the go-to place for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But with that increased sales and daypart activity, it's going to increase exposure to food safety, especially at these numbers here. I think, Melissa, I agree, like food safety could damage your reputation. If you survive, it's going to be very costly to repair it. So that 34% address it one day or less, that's even one day is a long time. It's typically an immediate response to correcting an issue. We've worked very hard in this industry for decades, like improving our image, making sure people trust us. We're not thought of as gas stations. We are a destination for food now. So we can do better. I know we could do better going forward. So I think this is a great finding, kind of a wake-up call. A best practice I've seen for folks that do really well at this, they set up systems to really predict potential gaps as opposed to waiting until something happens. So they want to know when something is about to break down. This could be something as simple as an opening checklist, or even, I know some of our customers, they'll have quick 5-minute meetings with the kitchen team throughout the day. Do they see anything? Is everybody practicing, food safety? I think these procedures need to be reassessed on a regular basis. Just because you put in a checklist doesn't mean everything's great. We've covered that. Let's move on to the next thing. They need to be reassessed on a regular basis. Things change. I also think feedback from team members, they can point out potential issues, especially what they see throughout the store. It may not just be getting feedback from the store manager, but getting feedback from all employees and how they can do better, I think is just a great best practice. They have that different up close perspective that I think could really be invaluable. And I think we need to remember today's consumer, they're like hypersensitive to hygiene and safety. It isn't just like, make me a sub, I'm not going to watch. Like they're looking at everything you're doing now and how this food is being prepared. So we've done a great job building our reputation. I think we need to continue being that trusted provider of fresh foods, but we're focused on quality. We really got to focus really hard on food safety going forward.
Great. Thanks, Tom. All right. So I think as we move to kind of a final leg, I think we're going to look forward a little bit around prioritization and where folks prioritizing. Oh, actually, no, we have. I'm skipping some very important data. So Melissa, take us through it.
All right, and yes, this needs to be on the priority list as well, although it may not be as much as it should be for a lot of operators. You know, one of the other findings from this study is that employees are stretched really thin, and we're able to, within this survey, identify some key benchmarks and really put some metrics around this for everybody in the audience to think about and to compare to what you're doing in your own operations. So what we did here, a bit of an eye chart here, but I think this is going to be very valuable for you to look at later and socialize internally in your brands. Is we asked operators about the various tasks that are completed during the day and about how many minutes it takes to complete each task and how many times these tasks are completed during the day. So we're able to identify how much cumulative time is really being addressed on a daily basis against these various operational tasks. So, you know, as the discussion lent itself earlier when Tom was talking about a lot of different things that operators are having to do during the day, understatement of the century. You know, you look at all of these from, some of them don't seem rather innocuous at first when you first ask the question, well, how long do you spend on this particular activity? And it might be 10 minutes, it might be 14 minutes, doesn't seem that much. But then you go ahead and you multiply that by the number of times these things are occurring each day. And the cumulative total actually ended up with 9 to 10 labor hours per day to complete these tasks. The average was 9.5 hours per day. Now, that's a lot. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of labor cost. And so when we, one of the other points on this data, and I know we'll talk about this more in a couple minutes, so, you know, so look at some of these metrics that we have here. 117 minutes, that's almost 2 hours being spent on those sanitizing, cleaning procedure checklists. Now that's likely a new labor time that was required when you think about it, based on all the integration of sanitation procedures from the pandemic. That's 2 hours a day. You know, that's, think about what our labor costs these days, and think about how the team at the store level, we don't have that normally that have that many team members at the store level. So how are they weaving this in and out of their customer facing tasks? An hour a day on inventory, an hour a day on open and closing checklists, an hour and a half a day on labeling products for food prep and carryover. So each individual item is adding up to a big chunk of time on a daily basis. And then the cumulative total, really concerning. The other piece that stood out as well is about auditing. The average, this was actually less than we would have expected. The average C-stores being audited only 5.1 times per year, if you want the stat, want to be precise about that, 5.8 audits per year. So that's on average every other month, maybe a little bit less. But even more concerning was that when we asked about the follow-up actions that come out of an audit, just about half of operators were very confident that the action items were being addressed properly. So sounds like a lot of lack of follow-up. And, you know, we can talk a bit about or dig into what some of those reasons might be, but, you know, no question there's some opportunities or need to improve that, because if you're going through the process of the audit and identifying flagging action items and they're not being addressed, then what's the point, right?
Yeah. I guess those maybe before I go to Tom. Tom, I do want to ask you about this sea of activity that's happening. Alyssa, anything really stand out for you? This was a lot, and I think as we're working with your team, like, I don't know if people have seen this kind of data before. It's hard even to quantify, like in your own operation, like minutes applied. So it was pretty neat to be able to see this across a pretty big survey respondent pool. Anything particular stand out to you?
Yeah, and well, one of the things that I think is, I do think, I think this is definitely going to be useful for those in the audience to think about using this as a benchmark. In fact, I'd say an action item after the summit is go back and do this within your own organization and think about the number of tasks and how many times per day and what the average time is, so that you can see not just on an average for the industry, but what's happening in your organization. But, there's so many complexities around that. We're beyond the sheer time and labor cost. This can deflect store team from spending their time on higher priority activities, perhaps. And again, in our C-store environment, you typically only have a couple of staff working per shift. So each of these tasks has to be done working around that customer flow. So no question, employees are being stretched thin, and that makes it more of a challenge to ensure that these tasks are being done properly. Also adds that additional exertion of them being stretched thin, which is something to really be giving some thought to in the tight labor environment that we're in right now, where it's hard enough to recruit and retain employees. Do we really want to be adding so much time doing paperwork to their everyday job?
Yeah, for sure. Tom, I'll ask you a similar question as I asked before. It's like, well, with everything that needs to get done, how do you focus and make sure the most important stuff's getting done? Like as you have to tackle this, as an operator, put yourself in operator shoes, or the folks you're speaking with, how do they get ahead of this?
Certainly.
To make sure the most important things happen,
Yeah. I mean, it's a challenge. There's no doubt that this increased scrutiny of, cleaning and sanitizing constantly throughout the day, it's just added another level of stress to people that are keeping the doors open 24/7. So there's something continuously going on, and work needs to be done. And most companies are finding it challenging to add more staff. I mean, they're just having a difficult time finding help. So we really need to find ways to operate more efficiently, or some tasks are going to be missed. The same person that we're asking to clean and sanitize and do all these other tasks, they also got pressure of adhering to age-restricted sales, merchandising, keeping the floor full, merchandising initiatives, monitoring food safety. It's really a lot to conquer in an 8-hour shift. I remember at some point in my career, I did a time study on all the tasks in a convenience store. It was like 170 tasks. I remember the CEO saying, our people do all those things? It's like, yeah, they all have to be done on top of great customer service, right? So we can never forget that. So there's so much to be done. I think this was a year of adding a lot of stress. So we got to work on some efficiencies. I would agree, 54% of operators see it as an opportunity to improve and follow up on corrective action. That's critical. If we're checking things, we need to figure out how to correct them. I believe most people want to get it right. So finding out what the root cause of those gaps, because sometimes things are repeated and they become systemic. They might need more training, or maybe it's a better communication of expectations. The best practice I've seen are the people who study the common gaps. Like, what is most common across our organization, and what can we put in place to address it? It's time that's really well spent. One recent example I'll give is customer identified an out-of-stock item through just walkthroughs and checklists throughout the stores, and it was flagged across multiple occasions. So they said something's going on here. It was a flag that stood out. It notified the category manager. It ended up the vendor changed an item number and didn't inform them. So they were able to fix it the same day by staying on top of, hey, this is happening across all stores. And by routing it to a person, and this is the critical part, they could fix it and do it quickly. That's most important. Or else we're just going through these audits and checklists without the follow-up. We're not getting things done. So that's one example of just being back in business very quickly. I think teamwork is follow-up in getting these corrective actions taken care of and finding out why they happened in the first place.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. You know, it is, I guess, one of the downsides of this virtual setting. I mean, how interesting for everyone that's kind of joining us here at the summit and tuning in to listen to the keynote. Be so interesting to kind of see as you're looking at these numbers, do these resonate, you know, or are you surprised, or do you feel that these numbers are high or low relative to where you think time is being spent in your own operation, as well as that some of the food safety data to feel like, you know, did that resonate with folks? But we'll be back in person soon. So as we now go to the home stretch, we want to look forward a little bit. And we did ask in the survey some questions about, okay, as we move beyond the pandemic priorities, right? So Melissa, why don't you walk us through some of that?
Exactly. And to wrap up, you know, looking, as you mentioned, David, beyond the pandemic. So we asked operators, what are your top priorities moving out of the pandemic for your organization, and where you're planning to make your investments. So let's take a look at what they had to say. You know, and it really boiled down to 3 key priorities, despite what we saw earlier in terms of the significant increase in adoption of technology. Seems that some operators are definitely understanding that there's still a gap there, and there's so many other areas of opportunity that technology can support their operations. So the top 3 priorities over the next 6 to 12 months, so this is very near term, is, you know, which do you expect to be the most important? And implementing new technology is one of those. To the point of so many things that we've talked about today, improving compliance with operating procedures. You know, as we saw, there's a lot of areas, a lot of gaps where operators are not feeling extremely confident that those operating procedures are being conducted effectively, or being communicated, or being followed up. So that's a top priority for the industry as well. And the employee training and recruitment piece that, you know, Tom just spoke to about what challenges that everybody is facing these days with attracting and retaining and training team, especially with a lot of the remote training that we have to do now. So 3 key areas that really seem to align pretty well with understanding some of the gaps in the study that we saw that we've just gone through. So when we asked, you know, technology is a broad term. No question, one of the fastest areas of adoption during the pandemic was looking at those sanitation procedures and checklists and so forth. But we also wanted to find out where they're looking at investing in technology and software over the next year. And the top areas that really bubbled up were that sanitizing and cleaning technology, because as we mentioned earlier, that is going to be here to stay. Consumers need that visual. Local government may require, but consumers definitely need that visual, and so do employees as well, to feel comfortable being in an indoor environment. Also, food safety tracking. So we're glad to see that there's some recognition that there needs to be better tracking of food safety, temperature, and food preparation, and customer feedback, getting that, keeping that pulse on your customer and what their experience expectations are, as well as what their experience was on their visits or purchases from the store. Top areas. Now, some other areas that stood out as well, you know, incident reports, making sure that technology is being used so you have that tracking capability and follow-up capability. And certainly we're seeing things such as employee training, employee recruitment, with the drive for revenue, marketing promotions. Overall, when I'm just looking at this vast array of areas of technology that operators are planning to introduce or invest in over the next 12 months, it's looks like just about every area of store operations and marketing, and also customer service as well. So very broad-based future integration, it appears to, in the industry. Which
That's great. Thanks, Melissa.
More complexity, right?
I know. All right. So as we look, I think we're as we have a few minutes left. Tom, I'm gonna have you give you the last word. Just kind of as you reflect on these priorities, how these like top 3 priorities fell out. Any final thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, so I think the priorities, they seem to be aligned with preparation for future disruptions, basically to be more agile. I think new technology is most likely going to focus on efficiencies. Where can we find efficiencies in our sites, in our operation? Things like automated temp monitoring, customer-facing technology like loyalty, order and delivery apps, contactless payments. I see a lot of interest in self-checkouts. People want to know what that's about, asking other operators how they're doing it. It's going to be big in 2021 and 2022. Even digital signage from an execution standpoint. I'm seeing that pop up more and more. I think these are going to be areas that are going to drive efficiency, and they're going to build on that food service momentum. As far as operations, I think this is a great area to focus on. Digitizing DM store walks, opening checklists, temp, and regulatory, for sure. I think this is going to provide operations that visibility across all sites. They had seen so many times in 2020 where they need to be proactive and pivot almost every month for a while. In an instant, really. This is new, this is new. This will give them the ability to do that very quickly, and also to seize the opportunity in ensuring corrective action for follow-up, which is what was pointed out. They weren't real confident in. So that's one way to do that. I think the third, recruiting and training, I mean, that is definitely an investment that needs to be made. You know, we're recovering in the job market, but it's still a challenge to find help. So online training, you know, that's going to be able to provide a wide audience where they can quickly change on the fly. It can also be handled remotely. So I see a lot of people either have it or are researching to invest in it. It's a source of pain for customers. In every discussion I have, they talk about help, they talk about training, they talk about people. That lack of help not only causes stress to the office and the manager, but it's really the entire team. So it stresses out everyone in the organization. And that gap could lead to the critical food safety. So focusing on recruiting and training is going to be big. I think these three areas, if we really continue to invest here, we'll be stronger, leaner, and more agile than ever before.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. Melissa, thank you so much for, it was a pleasure digging in and doing this research. And I thought your team really was able to surface some really important findings here. And Tom, thanks for your perspective on that. And thank you for everyone for joining us here at the summit. Of course, please do, as you're hopefully seeing on the summit site, we really had a chance. We're super grateful for all the operations leaders that gave us their time and shared their own ideas and learning. So be sure to check out some of the conversations that we had with them, which should now be accessible. And if you were interested in what really was a teaser, a lot of information presented here, but if you want to look at more complete view of the research that we did, it's actually now available. So we've just published it today on the summit site. You should be able to see it in the navigation. I think there's going to be like a research tab, which should give you easy access to that. So you're welcome to that and share it, with other colleagues within your operation, within your organization. And thank you again for the time. And I hope you do get a lot of value from the content and folks that we pulled together for the summit. Take care.